Hello everybody and greetings. Before we start the series off, I want to take a moment to talk about Akira Takarada. While this man isn't with us anymore, he left a huge impact on Godzilla fans to be felt for many years, bringing his talent, skills, smiles to the fans that he loved interacting with. He is one of the many that made us fall in love with this classic series, and for that I'd like to say thank you. Thank you for the memories. This series is dedicated to you, Akira. Hello, I'm Golden Destruction, bringing you back into another movie series review. This time together though, we will have a chance to walk through the many years of one of my favorite franchises of all time, as a kid, and hell, even as an adult. When I was younger, kids in my area just weren't into Godzilla exactly. It was always the usual, Spider-Man, Batman, Hulk, Power Rangers. They always had a huge surge in popularity in the late 90s where I lived, for my generation at least to say the least. And well, there's nothing exactly wrong with that, because I honestly enjoy the series I just mentioned, like every one of them. But the beauty of things is, as time evolves, things change. New effort is put into movies that surpasses old iterations that were intended to be the next big thing, but didn't climb to the heights they were hoping they'd make it to. Godzilla is no exception to this. You see, in the 90s, I was just known as the Godzilla kid. Kids just expected me to bring the usual to show and tell. Or if I was the star student, I prided myself in showing off my Godzillas in the hallway behind that glass. Despite all the madness in this world, and despite being an adult, that kid still exists within me. And that's why I'm here to walk you through this weekly journey of the Godzilla series. But, to fully understand the roots of this series, we must go back to the beginning of the series and do a few things. First, we must travel back in time. Second, we must find the roots of the inspirations of what came before Godzilla. Finally, we must understand world history events and how they link to the original movie and the overall series. In the year 1933, the world was introduced to King Kong. Even prior to Kong itself, there was rising interest in movies of dinosaurs running through the city, Lost World being a prime example, famous for its brontosaurus attack scene. By today's standards, it didn't look like much, but it was cutting edge and it was a blueprint that was placed in 1925, and look where we are nearly 100 years later. So we move forward to this 8 years later, and King Kong became a treasure, continuing to propel the imagination where it could possibly take us, with giant monsters doing battle, running through the cities. I shouldn't have to tell you about how much of a success King Kong became. Becoming a success in the box office, Kong himself would not only launch his own healthy franchise in the Western world, but capture the interest of the Japanese, and they would even provide many movies under Toho's banner. Before we even touch on Godzilla though, we have two major landmarks to stop at. And well, unfortunately, the next one's going to be a bit darker because it has to dive into world history. From 1939 to 1945, the worst war in history had raged on. The previous war that was believed to be the war to end all wars. Well, something worse and was lurking in the darkness. World War II, which would continue and end in a fashion that would open up dark new doors for humanity. And looking back, I firmly believe the moment that we did the Trinity test and when it was conducted, that door was open, but by the time the first bomb was dropped, there was no going back. More and more nuclear weapons would be developed by other countries. I wish we could say the worst is behind us, but current events kind of continue to keep this a reality in the back of our mind. Japan to this day remains the one lone country that's actually faced the horrors of nuclear weapons. The nuclear era was rising. And so were movies like The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, a movie about a dinosaur that's released after atomic tests are done, and it lays waste to wherever it goes. These, my friends, are just pieces of history, all wrapped together in one crazy ball, where all the ingredients are brought together and brought us the legendary Godzilla 1954, a movie symbolic of the horror of nuclear weapons, nuclear holocaust. It is the perspective of this movie that is a pure art in motion as the story is being told, from the country's own experience of the bombs, in the form of one horrifying monster. And even further than the two bombs that were dropped in Japan in particular, even afterwards tons of nuclear testing was being done, with areas being showered in fallout, boats and their catches all contaminated, people becoming sickened, deaths from radiation. The theme of the film, from the beginning, was the terror of the bomb. Mankind created the bomb. Now nature is going to take its revenge on mankind. Diving into the actual film, before I go any further, I just want to say there are two different versions of this film. And I think on average, more of the Western audience is more familiar with the Raymond Burr version itself. It just seems to be a bit more common. You talk to general people and they refer to that version over the original, which is kind of a little sad, but I'm not going to be a gatekeeper fan and kind of be like, well, if you've only seen this version, you're lesser of a fan. But I do want to point out the original one definitely is superior, and I can see the draw with this version. And for what it's worth, the Raymond Burr version obviously had its own draw, considering the fact that Raymond Burr was a big actor at the time. So the original variation, if you sit and watch it, I advise you to pay attention. Read them subtitles, because it is far more impactful than King of the Monsters variation. Putting yourself in a position as a citizen of Japan watching this, kind of thinking back, what if you first saw this movie in 1954 and your country just experienced the events of what happened? It was all only 9 years before this movie actually came out. A complete reflection. Thoughts that mirrored what had been encountered by this country. Sometimes when I watch this, I reflect as a viewer. You kind of think about, when American audiences saw Cloverfield. There was a lot of reflection of 9/11 and all that footage of people running around with cameras, trying to survive. In fact, both movies have some similarities. Japan drew parallel to the bombings. America drew it to 9/11. It's all very real. It's important though that remember though each country suffered in different ways. For now though, this video is about Godzilla and Japan's story. In fact, it is one of the beauty of the Godzilla films is Japan will retell what Godzilla movies are based on and what the ongoing events are. Whether it's nuclear weapons, anti-pollution, Cold War related, earthquake and tsunamis. A common art of these films is just beyond guys in a suit duking it out, and honestly, it's the heart of these films. In the 1956 version, I'll admit, let's just say that it kinda dumbs the movie down a bit, but I'll say it's easy to follow along, at least for its iteration. So we got Raymond Burr who plays Steve Martin, a reporter in the film, and Burr's part kinda adds a little bit into the events of the 54 one, as he kinda tells his story from his perspective. I'll be honest, it gives American audiences a little something to identify with, but as a general viewer, I don't perceive this as necessary, because the events of the suffering in the original make me feel something. Watching a helpless country attempt to find hope in their darkest hour with no success until the end. And one of the extra key events in this movie isn't just all the above I mentioned, but Dr. Serizawa's project, the Oxygen Destroyer. Initially, he gives Emiko a peek at the horror of the weapon that was designed, but it must be kept a secret. But after the wrath of Godzilla and all the carnage that has been dealt, Emiko breaks and tells Ogata about his weapon, which is believed to be the only hope for stopping Godzilla. It's not exactly easy for Serizawa to know that his dark creation is out, a new super weapon, and the possibility that he may be forced to construct more, and what evil could human do? What harm could they do with this new weapon, and what terrors it could itself unleash?
The world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Chilling emptiness, knowing what had been created. He eventually ended the war, but what possibility could our world be entering? What could the future look like? Eventually Serizawa agrees to detonate the weapon himself, only. But he takes his life in the process. It's a bittersweet ending. Godzilla is stopped. Serizawa's life is lost. And man looks into a bleak future, knowing that nuclear testing continues. A new Godzilla could be on the rise. Is man ready for the future? This, ladies and gentlemen, is where it all began. A dark, telling message. I can't stress enough the importance of the original movie. As I've grown older, the message has only gotten stronger. I was maybe 9 years old when I first saw this movie, and when I saw it, it was pretty well just a movie about a monster destroying and rampaging the city. But the thing was, I wasn't old enough to understand the message. I wasn't able to wrap my head around everything it was trying to tell, the story, the reality, and everything that it's based on. But there is one thing I did understand about the movie. That Godzilla 1954, or even the 56 version, is a special movie. It's extremely unique. By definition, it is absolutely an art that is crafted extremely well. From the story, the sets, the suit, the monster, which has a lot of personality and separates it from just any generic dinosaur that we saw previously, and even separates it from King Kong himself. And of course the characters and the actors themselves and the driving force behind this movie. Regardless of what version you watch, you're in for a treat. If I were to dissect the US version, I'd just like to say that the movie really just feels like it has so much missing. And if you go back and watch them back to back, and if you're having one of those nights, or if you just want to go ahead and watch, say, the Japanese version one night and the US version the next night, you will tell the differences, because the message I feel like is lost as far as the political message. Some of Raymond Burr's scenes just work, and they were kind of added in after the fact, but then there are other scenes like near the end where he just feels like he's just, well, he's not even there. They just insert his scenes in there. It just feels really awkward. But overall, the US version is pretty well just stripped down. It just feels like a giant monster movie destroying the city. Really not a lot of extra context that is really important to the story. I don't want to completely pan this version of the movie, because it is extremely responsible for blowing up the Godzilla series to what it is today worldwide. It showed it on a different scale. But the big thing is, though, to my understanding, the 54 cut was not shown widely to Western audiences. In fact, it was the 56 version that was predominantly seen, and eventually the 54 version came out and was publicized, and I think all of us now look at this movie and see why the original version is superior to the 56 version. Yes, the effects and the scenes are dated, but movies like this require an audience with pure imagination to reflect on the reality of what it is showing you. The message still stands, and this is only the start of Godzilla's long journey in the movie industry. We have so much to talk about in future movies. Godzilla 1954 remains strong and is unmatchable to any kaiju movie even 50 plus years later. It is the main seed for all of Toho's wide catalog of movies. So in short, Godzilla is a full embodiment of what it sets out to capture, and guess what? It succeeds. Thank you for watching this video, and be sure to join me for the next installment, which is Godzilla Raids Again.